Let's get going. It's coming. Here it comes. And of course, today's all about CQD, and we want to make sure that you know what CQD stands for. So go ahead, pop your answers in there, submit them, and every lucky winner is going to win a bag of garbage.
Awesome. Looks like we're getting some responses.
Dwayne, do these stack up to your quality of answers?
I'm absolutely going with come quick danger. I
Come quick danger.
I like that one.
Or close quarters defense?
Yep,
Like,
close quarters defense works.
Okay, good. I'm going to close these results. Thank you, everybody, for participating. We had some great answers.
Yeah.
Dashboard is the right answer. All right, great.
Thanks everyone for participating, and we'll kind of turn it over to our team. So Matt and Dwayne, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself? Oh, Matt, are you there? Did we lose you?
I think we did.
Okay. Well, Dwayne, you want to go ahead and kick us off while we get Matt to jump back in?
Sure. Dwayne Friedlander, Modern Communications CSM with Microsoft, came out of the CE organization, PFE, DSE, whatever you happen to know us as. Yes, that is actually my Mustang. I am an absolute car nut. You know, at 50 years old, who would have thought I would be driving it like I stole it? And I am. One of the things I love the most about CQD is the fact that this is one of the premier tools that I used with my customers as a CSE or as a CE and a DSE to actually track down call quality issues on their network and to see if it was in fact on their network or outside their network. I think Matt's going to join back here in just a second. Let's give him just a minute.
Thanks everyone for your patience.
While we're waiting on him, I'm going to kick over PowerPoint Live and see if I can get mine to.
There we go.
I'm back.
All right.
What's a presentation without a little bit of technical difficulties on the front end? So apologies. I'm Dwayne's partner in crime. My name is Matt Sims. I'm based in Milwaukee. I'm also a Modern Communications Customer Success Manager. I've spent the majority of my career working in Microsoft Unified Communications. Worked for a partner and ran a Unified Communications practice for a number of years, and have been at Microsoft for about 5 years or so in various roles in the healthcare and life sciences vertical. And I've got a picture here of Neil Peart. I'm a big music fan, and I'm a drummer, so I figured it'd be appropriate to add Neil in here. One bit about CQD and why I love CQD is what I've learned through the years is that it can be sometimes frustrating trying to isolate an issue when you have an issue with a voice over IP call or a meeting. And what's great about the call quality dashboard is it allows you to look really high level at all of the activity that's happening in your environment, but also allows you to dig into a very granular level and to look at in a particular call and get to piece together what's happening on a particular call. So again, really happy to spend some time with you. So I'm just going to talk through what our kind of high-level agenda looks like for today. So first, Dwayne's going to talk through how we think about quality. Like what when we say quality, what does that mean? What are the metrics and thresholds that we use in order to define whether something is of good quality or not, as it relates to Teams meetings, or what we call Teams real-time media, which is audio, video, and screen sharing. Then I'll talk a little bit about what is the tooling that we have. I mean, we're going to particularly talk today about call quality dashboard, but we'll try to put it in context. It's not the only tool that we have to look at media quality. Then Dwayne will be kind enough to do a demo for us on setting up some of these tools, like setting up Power BI with the call quality dashboard connector. And then we will really dive in deep. Well, we'll go report by report into the quality of experience review reporting pack. So with that, I'd like to just transition it over to Dwayne, and he's going to start to just define what we mean, what we mean by quality, and what are the measurements that we should be thinking about.
Okay, thank you, Matt. I appreciate that. I did turn off my camera because it will bury my poor computer.
No problem. I'll do the same, buddy.
Defining quality. So what are quality metrics? What are we here to discuss, right? What do we really care about, right, as administrators, right? There is, and we'll talk later on about this, there is a URL out there for CQD classifiers, and you'll get more information on that later. So on quality, what we're talking about here is telemetry, right? Well, what is telemetry? It's jitter, it's packet loss, it's round trip time, right? And then we do classifiers for audio, video, and sharing, right? What's the difference between telemetry and reliability? Did the call drop unexpectedly, right? Or did it take more than one try to join a call? So did we have a problem setting up the call? Endpoints, headsets, was the right transport used? Are we blocking UDP? Are we allowing TCP? Are we doing split tunnel off VPN? Right? Are the clients updating regularly? This all comes down to that user experience, right? That is where we're focused, right? Were they able to join the meeting? Was the video clear? How did the audio sound? Were there problems with the call or with the meeting, right? And if there were, what were those issues, right? And the usual suspects here, right? Jitter, we all know what jitter is, right? That's that change in the delay between the successive packets, right? Packet loss, right? Somehow packet just didn't make it, right? Round trip time, that is going to be important. There are two specifications for that round trip time, and we'll talk about those a little bit later, right? The MOS score, right? How much network loss and jitter, affected the quality of the receiving audio, right? And then average ratio concealed samples, right? So we actually take a concealed sample and we want to know what the average ratio is on that. And again, this URL you see here, CQD classifiers, all of that is detailed out there.
And one point I want to interject, if we go back to that, back one slide. So what's interesting about that last measurement is around the concealing of samples. We do want to see that be, we want to see the ratio of concealed samples be small, but it's actually kind of a cool indicator. There's a lot of intelligence that's baked into Teams. It's not just Teams, it's not just a Microsoft thing, but we will, within the codecs that we use, we'll do a lot of, and the protocols that we use, we'll do a lot of healing of less than perfect network conditions. And so what that last ratio is basically specifying is, hey, if we're having to heal a lot of the audio, that's an indicator that the network conditions aren't well. But for a lot of the things that we'll talk about today, there are certain protocol level things that we do to just, regardless of the network conditions, try to provide the best experience for your users, even when you do have packet loss or you do have some amount of jitter. So sorry, Dwayne.
No, you're fine. You're fine. Jump in. Okay. So optimizing for quality, right? And I'm sure if you have used Teams at all, you will understand this. Matt and I joke about it quite a bit. Realistically, Teams is the canary in the coal mine. If there is a problem on your network, Teams will find it and exploit it, right? But earlier I talked about round trip time and there being two specific or specifications for that. You'll see here, client to Microsoft Edge. So that's your desktops out to Microsoft Edge. But then there's also this metric here, right? So that's your edge, not your edge server, but the edge of your network to our Microsoft Edge. And the magic number one way on latency is always going to be 50 milliseconds from the client side, 30 from the edge side. Those numbers get important when we start talking about backhauling traffic, right? These latency numbers, again, they get important when we start to talk about backhauling traffic. You'll see down here, we have a host of URLs, right, around preparing your network, right, downloading the tool, the NAT tool, which you can use, and then connectivity.office.com. This is a one-off, so it's something I would give to a single user and have them log in and run. Why would I do that? Because I have a single user who has an issue and who is complaining. I want to see where they are connecting to Microsoft.
One note on that last slide too, Dwayne, that NAT tool that you mentioned, I'll put a link in the chat, but that, or I guess these links are actually, they are live links in the presentation.
Yes.
But that second link of the three, it's the Teams network assessment tool, which is a great, it's a simple utility you can install on any endpoint device running Windows. And it generates some synthetic network traffic and will provide you measurements for packet loss, jitter, latency. It will also try to ping all of the cloud infrastructure that exists for Teams, like our transport relays and stuff, all of the infrastructure that kind of powers Teams real-time communications. So it's a great way to get comfy with what does the traffic flow look like for Teams, and on a particular endpoint, you can do a quick end-to-end test without a lot of heavy lifting.
So let's talk a little bit about targets. These are Microsoft targets. When you look and you see that a call has been evaluated as poor, that means it's exceeded these targets, right? That's all this is talking about, right? And again, this is nothing new, right? All of this is detailed out. And once we get into the reports a bit, you'll see where some of the calls were actually detailed out and they broke the metrics. So, we mark them in red, right? We try to make it simple. Optimizing for quality. Again, the usual suspects, QoS, right? QoS should start on the client side and go all the way out, right? So it's great that you would set QoS on the client side, on the Teams client. You can do that a number of ways. One of the most popular is using GPOs. That's great, but it only works if it's honored all the way through the network. Now we know that once you step over that boundary out of your network, QoS may get stripped. So in the Teams Admin Center, there is also an opportunity to assign QoS. Bypassing proxies, again, not new, but definitely worth mentioning. Why is that? Well, a proxy is going to add a delay, right? And if we're talking about Matt signing into Office 365, a small delay is not a big deal. A big deal is when we start talking about delaying the audio. Implementing split tunnel VPN. There's a number of VPN solutions out there that have this built in. I was reading a security paper on that today. Ensuring the right ports and protocols are open. Most of the customers I work with already have this taken care of, but in case you don't, or in case it's something that you need to look into, right? The live URL here will take you over. There's also the Office 365 IP's URL webpage. And using certified devices. I don't think we talk enough about this. There is a report in QER that will show you what device is being used. If it's not a certified device, it's probably not going to have a good experience. Now, that is not an all up conversation, right? Meaning, doesn't necessarily ring true on every call, right? 9 times out of 10, I see a bad experience when they're using an uncertified device, but there's always that 10th time where, everything works out fine and everybody's happy, and the call goes great. So, but it's just easier and it's much smarter to use those certified devices. And I think, Matt, you're up.
I am. Thank you, sir. So we're going to switch gears a little bit and just talk about some of the tooling that we have to look at media quality in Teams. And there's a couple major, couple primary tools that we use. The first, we'll start with what we call call analytics. And call analytics provides information really in a user-centric view within the Teams Admin Center. So it provides a 30-day history, so kind of a retro 30-day history of both calls, and when we say calls, we mean our peer-to-peer calls, but also conference calls, and meetings. We build on top of the RBAC, the role-based access control roles that exist for the Microsoft Teams service. So things like the communications administrator and the help desk administrator, we build on top of those. And the way that I would encourage you to think about call analytics versus call quality dashboard is call analytics. If you have a single user that's saying, hey, I'm having trouble with Microsoft Teams on a particular meeting or a particular call or a particular day of calls, I would probably start first in call analytics. It's easy to access via the web interface, and there are different views. There's a basic view, and then you can get at all the underlying metrics that Dwayne was mentioning, things like a bunch of endpoint details around what headset or device is being used, what's reported as the packet loss, jitter, latency. All of that you can get at for a particular call. The role of call quality dashboard that we're focused on today is, in addition to being able to look at things for a particular user, for a particular call, you need to be able to look real big picture at your environment all up and report to leadership, to meet your service level agreements around around the services that the IT services you're providing back to your business. Call quality dashboard allows you to confidently do so because you're seeing, quite literally, 12 months of historical call and meeting information across your entire organization. And that could be maybe a lot to stomach, but we're going to talk through how you can start carving up your network so that it's easy to isolate certain portions of your network. And that's the entire purpose of this the reporting pack that we're going to look at today is how do you make sense of this massive volume of data, which is really, really powerful, but needs to be parsed out a bit. So call quality dashboard is not new. It's been around. I would estimate that it's been around for 7 or 8 years or so. What is relatively new in the last few years is that we pivoted from a web interface for Power BI as being the primary means of interacting with all of this wonderful quality data to pivoting to use Power BI. And so what Dwayne's going to be walking you through in a couple minutes is getting all the bits and bytes installed within the Power BI desktop app, the call quality dashboard connector for Power BI, how to get all those things like connected, because I don't think our documentation always makes that a straightforward procedure. So we're going to try to demystify that a bit and walk through what that looks like end to end. Because at the end of the day, when you can connect this to your tenant and make use of all of these pre-canned reports, which you can just use as a starting point to make additional custom reports. It's quite powerful. So the components here are Power BI Desktop. That's the authoring tool that you'll use locally to publish your reports up to the Power BI service, which exists within Microsoft 365. There is this Power BI connector. That's the custom connector that was developed by Microsoft to connect the Power BI desktop app and the Power BI service to the underlying call quality dashboard data source. And then these are the templates that we're going to be really leaning into today. We call them QER, and we'll talk through what that means, but it's basically quality of experience in review. The only licensing requirement here is when you get this set up, the person who is publishing the QER reports to your tenant, they need to have a valid Power BI Pro or Power BI Premium license, but any consumers of the report don't necessarily have to have that license. So this presentation is not about trying to sell you any licensing. We're just trying to demonstrate the value of these free reports that you get out of the box with Microsoft Teams. So the last way that the last tool that you can take advantage of to get at this quality information is if you're a developer, you can make use of our publicly available REST API called the Call Records API. And that just, I would say, frankly, it is our partners, and I'm sure you recognize these sort of names. Splunk, Nectar is another one that's not on here that I'm pretty confident uses the Call Records API. Those third-party solutions can connect to the API and programmatically access the same information that you're doing so within Power BI. Okay, with that, I think we're going to take a little break from the PowerPoint and proceed with one of the more interesting parts of the presentation, which is just the setup of these tools so that you can take advantage of this in your environment. So Dwayne, over to you.
Thank you, Matt. Okay, so I'm going to look at one more slide. I know Matt said we're going to take a break, but I wanted to just kind of touch base on what we're going to look at here, right? So I'll talk a little bit about installing Power BI Desktop. These canned CQD reports, or the CQD templates, right, are located publicly here at this URL. The QER templates are located here, right? And this is where I will do kind of a walkthrough or a demo here in just a second. RLS has been implemented. There are some limitations, right? Understand that when we talk about using these Power BI reports, what we're doing is a direct query into CQD on the back end, meaning you have to have admin credentials to access CQD. So how would you do that? You can go into the Teams Admin Center. If you go into reporting on the left-hand rail, underneath there is CQD. If you click on that, it will automatically do a single sign-on and sign you in. That's how you know whether or not you have access. But if you are a tenant admin, I assure you, you have access. So for the moment, I'm going to stop presenting this. Now there's any number of ways to get the Power BI desktop. The easiest way that I've found, and the one that generally works, is just to go to the downloads page. I usually go to advanced options and just tell it to download here. Why do I do that? I've had the best results with that. Right, so let's assume that I've downloaded the desktop and I've installed it and everything's running. Now I want to be able to pull down that QER Power BI template. So I go to the URL that we've specified, right? I pull that down and I unzip it, right, into my downloads folder, because I'm absolutely that guy who leaves everything in his downloads folder. And you'll see in here there's a couple of files. This PQX file is going to be important. This README file is going to be important. We're going to walk through that just briefly at a kind of a high level. Again, the PQX file came in the download. We've already installed Power BI. The big takeaway here is that this folder structure may need to be built by hand. So you may have to go in. Now, when you build this folder structure, please understand, it has to be identical to what you see here. Spaces, caps, everything, because that's going to be used when you do that direct connection with that PQX file. So once we've done that, we're going to go in and we're going to launch Power BI, and I'll show you that in just a few minutes. But one of the things we have to do, there's a few things we need to do. We need to go into options and settings, and then options and security. Why do we need to do that? Because if you'll look here under data extensions, there's a big red flag that says not recommended. That is the box we want you to check and say, okay. That allows the direct connection, right? Going back to CQD Online, right? To connect to the back end, the cube, and do the direct query. We can change the template from here, or you can do what I do, close Power BI and reopen it. Once I do that, I've got this pbit in the folder that I opened. All right, anybody know the difference between a pbit and a pbix? One ends in an X, one ends in a T. Matt, you'll have to tell me if anybody answered that.
I don't see anything. I don't see anything in the chat yet, but is one of them a template? Could that be it, Dwayne?
There you go. Nice. And that's the only way that I remember it when I began to work with these, was the one that ends in a T is a template. The one that ends in an X means I've accessed this data and I've saved it, so that becomes mine. So the X is mine, the T is a template. Okay, and we can open that, and how do we know if we're connected? Right, so I'm in Power BI, I've opened up your template, Dwayne. How do I know if I'm connected? If I go over here and I look under fields, you will see CQD. If you are connected and you expand that, you will see all of these over here. These are all queries that you can do. Dimensions, measures, filters. Again, outlined on that web page. If you run into issues, there are a few troubleshooting techniques in here. If you still have issues, right, you can always reach out to Matt directly or Jonathan Wynn, and they'll be able to who will get me involved, and we will be able to help you. So couple of things that we need to make sure that you are aware of, right? And we'll walk through some more of this later, but one of the big things is this is call it the home page or the welcome page. These are all hot linked, right? And again, I'll talk about this in a little bit too. The big thing here is check for update and submit feedback. If I hold control and click on check for update, it's going to go out and see if there's a newer version. If it is, it's going to pull that newer version down and drop it into my downloads folder. Submit feedback. This goes directly to the developer. Gentleman named Matt Wade who created this. He does read your feedback. So if you provide him feedback, he will read it. If it's worth incorporating, he may even reach out to you to get some clarification. So it just sort of depends on what you've suggested. Okay, and I think that was it for me for the moment. You want to share, Matt, or you want me to go back in and?
Yeah, let me reshare here 1 second.
Okay. There we go.
Perfect. Okay, so we've talked a bit, we've started throwing around this term QER. So let's talk about that for a minute. I appreciate that, Brian, in the chat. Just what is a QER? So QER is quality of experience in review. So the idea behind the QER, the QER concept is that we want to use all the valuable data that's there, that's provided on the back end of Teams, to quickly look at areas of potential concern, and or just look to optimize your environment so that people at the end of the day have the best possible experience when they're using the Microsoft Teams platform for calling and for meetings and with devices. So, and we'll go through this and go kind of report by report, but in various different views into the data, the value of CQD is being able to look at this very large data set and identify and slice and dice it in different ways so that you can analyze it to figure out where those areas are where you need to optimize. Is it a particular building? Is it a particular part of your Wi-Fi infrastructure? Are there changes that need to be made with your firewall infrastructure or your proxy approach? All those, we get hints and insights in the QER reporting pack for all those different areas. So in the QER template itself, in the aggregate, there's 24 reports. The landing page will go through a report and just defining the things that you'll see represented in the data. So we're going to go through those together, but things like what is a stream? When we say a stream, like what does that mean? What does a conference ID mean? What's a meeting ID? All those things that when you're looking at the report, you know how to decipher it or decode it. You also have the ability to look for a particular user in the same sort of way that you could, yeah, the TPC reports. You really have the same ability to identify, to look up all of the various sessions for a particular user, right? Again, as I mentioned earlier, we have call quality dashboard. We also have call analytics. So what you might do is you look first at call analytics. You don't see really anything that points your investigation in the right direction with regard to what's the cause of this particular user's poor experience. You can do a search in the call quality dashboard that allows you to look more broadly over a longer time range. So again, one thing I'd just restate is call analytics can look back 30 days. Call quality dashboard can look back 12 months. So you have a much longer window and much more data that you can parse out. And then many of these other reports we're going to go through together. We're not going to go through all 24 reports, but we are going to do a pretty deep dive on a lot of the reports so that you can leave the session with a bit of working knowledge on how to make sense of the data. So one point I want to make is that QER is not the only available templates for call quality dashboard. It is as Dwayne mentioned, it's a set of reports that has been built by Matt Wade, who is a Microsoft employee who has many years of experience. He sits within Teams engineering, has many years of experience working on real-time communications and media quality. So in addition to that, we have a whole bunch of additional reports that are accessible via that handy dandy green go here link on the slide. Those are kind of the more official Microsoft templates for CQD. There's some value in those reports as well. It's just beyond the scope of our discussion to talk through those. And again, that's part of the reason that we pivoted to using Power BI versus kind of the old school web interface for call quality dashboard, is there's just a lot more flexibility in writing custom visualizations and custom reports far beyond what you could do in the older CQD interface. So before we start, I would say diving deep into the reports that comprise the QER pack or QER reporting pack. I do want to just take a minute or two and just talk through some of the definitions that we use within this reporting pack and within the call quality dashboard to at large. The first is the meeting. So when we talk about a meeting, this is created when a Teams meeting is either a scheduled meeting, which is more common, or alternately is created via the Meet Now button in Teams. It's the meeting ID is included in the join URL that you get when you join a Teams meeting or you're invited to a Teams meeting. It's the URL includes that meeting ID, but it's not the URL is broader than just the ID itself. The conference is the next thing that we want to define, and this conference ID dimension is given to each meeting and or to each call. So in a given meeting ID, you can have one or multiple conference IDs that are associated. And a good example here is a recurring meeting. And so as many of you are probably aware, when you schedule a Teams meeting, and let's say it's a weekly team touch point, each recurrence of that meeting series shares the same meeting ID. And whereas each instance of that meeting has a unique conference ID. And the way that you can see that is if you, like most folks, I schedule my Teams meetings in Outlook. And if you ever notice, for each new Teams meeting that you create, kind of a la carte, you'll get generated a unique URL for the join URL, but you will not get a unique join URL for when you set up a recurring meeting series. And again, that's just kind of how things work, where we use dynamic conference IDs. It's a security feature, but the only exception to that is when we have a meeting series, and in that case we share the same meeting ID for all instances of that meeting. So the third thing we want to talk about is a call or a session. A traditional way to refer to that is a call leg, and a single meeting endpoint against a conference ID. So let's take an example of a Teams meeting. You would, in an instance of a Teams meeting, you would see multiple call legs associated with a conference ID. And so you would see more call legs as you had more participants and as you had more what we call communications modalities, or like are people doing audio but also video and also receiving screen share and contributing screen share. We would see each of those as a call leg. Stream or segment. A stream is the most kind of precise entity within CQD, and the simple example here is if you have a voice over IP call, a Teams call between, let's say, myself and Dwayne. So it's a peer-to-peer call. All of the signaling, so the call setup traffic, all of that flows through the Microsoft Cloud. That's handled as HTTPS traffic. The actual audio itself, which we encapsulate using a protocol called Secure Real-Time Transport Protocol. There are two media streams for that call. One is let's assume it's just Dwayne, or excuse me, let's assume it's just audio. So there's one stream that is Dwayne to Matt, and there's another second stream which is Matt to Dwayne. Whereas, and each of those are unidirectional streams, whereas the signaling stream is bidirectional stream. That's the HTTPS, and then you've got 2 by RTP, 1 in each direction. Okay, so that is just kind of a baseline on the entities that you'll see as we walk through these reports. And we'll do our best to kind of reiterate as we're going through. But we'd like to proceed with kind of a deeper dive and kind of making it real, making it more practical with using the QER reports. So Dwayne, over to you.
Thanks, sir. So we're going to do kind of a high-level walkthrough on some of these reports, right? As I showed you earlier, the first thing you're going to see is this home page when you open up the Power BI. And you'll see this CQD Wiki, right? That's because this version, the version I showed you earlier, was version 4.3. This is version 4.5. So you can see there's additions, right, that are being made to this. But again, as Matt said, you know, here's kind of a high-level definition, right, of what you can and can't look through in CQD, and the check for update and the submit feedback, right? So this is one of the report tabs across the bottom, the dailies, right? So it's 30 days out, right? We tried to make this as intuitive as possible, right? With this red line in here, right? And then, you know, poor feedback rate from your users, audio quality, right? Again, the red lines are going to be the targets, right? Video quality, you know, daily sharing, right? Again, all of these are dailies. Drop stream and setup failures. That's where we were talking about reliability, right?
And Dwayne, one note.
Yep.
If you could go back one. When we talk about those target values, one thing that I kind of want to just to relate to earlier in the presentation. When we talked about defining quality and defining those thresholds, that's what's defined by those, that's what's represented by those red target lines here. We represent target values for thresholds that we deem, that Microsoft has deemed appropriate thresholds for what would constitute a good quality call versus a poor call.
Absolutely, good point. So this is an overall, right? This is one of the slides in there under usage. Executives love this because it gives them kind of a top level view, right, of how many sessions, right? Total meeting minutes, right? And you'll see up here, this inside outside corporation, that becomes important later. And we'll have conversation around that in another slide here in just a few minutes. You can break this out by country. One of the most important things I think is right here in the Power BI, these sometimes, because of the way these visualizations are stacked, these can be a little challenging to get your hands on. But this right here is what's called focus mode, this little square with an arrow coming out. You will be able to focus on just this visualization. And it basically is a way to drop, I don't want to call it drop down, let's call it go up a level, so that what we're looking at is just this visualization. That becomes important later, right, as we break down and we start talking about a heat map, which is on the audio details. And again, you can hover over these, right? You'll get the actual total number of call count, right? You'll get the actual total call count changes, right? And how those are ranked out. Building data. This is where, and I just spoke about this inside outside here. You see, this is where you're going to define inside and outside. So in the call quality dashboard on the web page, there is an option, if you go into it, to upload tenant data. Right? If you have not uploaded tenant data there, it will let you know when you access the web page. So what does that look like? Matt, I'm going to steal this screen share for just a second, okay?
Yeah, please do.
Okay, so this is my demo tenant. Does everybody see that?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. And so I can upload my building data in here, right? And again, a demo tenant, so I have not uploaded any data. But this is where I would upload my building file. How did I get here? Well, I went into the Teams Admin Center and I clicked on Call Quality Dashboard. That's it. And then once in Call Quality Dashboard, I can hit the little gear and that will jump up and it'll say, upload your tenant data. And then that takes you here. There is, again, a spreadsheet that Matt and I will provide you so that you'll be able to look at, and it's a demonstration, but none of the information is in it is accurate. It's just a demo version, but you'll be able to use it for the basic formatting to fill out. Now, a couple of things to be aware of here. When you upload your tenant data, let's say you upload 10 networks. Let's say next week, Matt comes along because he's the network administrator and he says, hey, we're adding 4 more networks. So you would go in here, you would download the existing file and then add those 4 to it and re-upload. You cannot just upload the 4. You have to do the entire list again and the additions. Conversely, if Matt calls me and says, hey, we're getting rid of these 2 subnets, we're consolidating, then we have to go in and we have to remove. We would download the Excel spreadsheet. It's a CSV file. We would download it, we would modify it, and then re-upload the entire sheet again. You want to go ahead and share again, Matt?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So I just want to kind of reiterate just how important this is, because what you're dealing with CQD is we have both the the Microsoft official reporting reports for report templates for CQD, as well as the web interface for CQD, as well as the QER reports that we're reviewing today. All of them have been written kind of to take advantage of you defining what network ranges are on your managed network and what and then buildings and or sites within that managed network, and then what is not on your managed network. The so what, who cares about that, in addition to just providing lots of flexibility with troubleshooting, you can represent the difference in quality on your for Teams sessions on your managed network versus on your the unmanaged network. So one of the questions that Jerry brought up earlier was, well, you know, QoS, like, why should we do QoS? Because, and it's a great question. Common concern is, well, you know, Teams traffic is optimized to run over the internet anyway. Why should we even do quality of service and prioritize traffic? And the truth is, you can still further optimize all the traffic that's under your control. And you can represent that in CQD by slicing and dicing the data by how much better users' experiences are on your managed network versus what's on the on your unmanaged network. So let me just get back to the presentation here. Okay. Dwayne, did you have one more slide, or is this next one mine? Looks like you're on.
Sorry. Yeah, sorry
No
about
worries.
that. I have one more.
Okay, cool.
So again, crucial to get this in here. And the reason we say that is not because, you know, Matt and I want to know. This is for you going forward. This is going to make your job tracking down issues easier going forward. And we talk a little bit about some of the reports that are listed in here, but this to me is one of the more crucial ones because it deals with user feedback. Direct feedback from your end user gives you a great pulse on where they are. Okay. Again, you can up and down, right? Meaning I could right click and I could drill down through here. But the most important part, I believe, is, you know, expanding the rows. But right here, if you'll look, there's a poor feedback by user UPN. So as an administrator, you will be able to see that Matt says that Teams calling doesn't work, and you'll see what rating he gave it. Now, why is that important? Because if I have 50 people on the third floor, right, of my office building, and 49 of those people love it, but number 50 doesn't, maybe we need to go talk to number 50, right? And that Matt guy, he's always starting trouble. So, you know, we probably need to sit him down on some corrective action thing or something. So
That is true. That's a true statement. A lot of great conversation happening in the chat, a lot of great questions. And we'll do our best to address those as we go through here. And anything we can address, we can, we're going to provide our contact info at the end. We're happy to tackle anything offline. Appreciate the lively discussion.
okay, Matt, I think you're next.
Yeah, pardon me here. Okay, so the next area that we have visibility into with these QER reports is device-related issues. Not necessarily device-related issues, but which devices are being used in your environment. So this particular environment, we see roughly 50%, 52-ish% of the sessions are using built-in audio, built-in microphone, and likely built-in speaker on their device. And so what that means is they're not using Teams certified devices. Does that mean that they're always going to have a crappy experience with Teams? No, it doesn't. But it's something to look more closely at, and it informs maybe a larger discussion about device strategy. And in this case, I want to kind of demystify a couple of things. We talk about render device in a lot of the CQD stuff. Render device really just means speaker. A speaker is a render device. You're rendering audio out of your speakers. Capture device. Why don't they just call this a microphone? I don't know, but a microphone is a capture device. So just take note of those two kind of quirks. Render device, speaker. Capture device. The audio device that captures audio is a microphone. You also see, we talked a little bit about the user feedback earlier. You see here that we don't see user principal name here. And that's because we're accessing tenants on behalf of our customers. So any of the end user identifiable information is obscured on purpose so that we can't see that, so that no one can see that, respecting your privacy. When you go into this report and any of the places that you see these fields like UPN or this stuff that's blurred here, you're going to see all of the details there. So you'll see where there is an individual like this, UPN is actually, that's not one individual. So you're not going to see a value there, but there's plenty of parts in these reports where you're going to see information that's obscured, and that's because we're accessing it from the Microsoft tenant. Clients. So another different perspective on the data is, one of the great things about Teams is that we've designed it to be somewhat OS agnostic, not fully agnostic, right? We're placing lots of development cycles on Windows, but I'm sure all of you are using the iOS or the Android mobile app. There's also VDI client. There's Teams for Mac. There's the web client itself. And the nice thing about this clients report is you can see overall breakdown of which clients are folks using, just as simple as that. And then some interesting information around where are there client related issues. So endpoint detected network delay, endpoint detected, this one is particularly interesting to me, which is endpoint detected insufficient CPU, so insufficient that it's impacting the quality of audio. So we would typically get audio breaking up, dropouts or things of that nature. And then what is the poor audio stream percentage rate that's attached to that? So in this case, a pretty significant amount of sessions, right? 96,000 sessions that contributed where at some point in the call, that insufficient CPU was impacting the quality of the audio experience. Just one simple thing to note, you see there's a lot of opportunities here where you can slice and dice. So as Dwayne mentioned, in each of these different visualizations, you can click to drill down. You see the ability to slice and dice by different version types. So we could, in this one, it's the default is set to Windows, but you could slice and dice it so you're just looking at the Teams Windows client versus Android, etc. Bill, I see your question around significant audio degradation. I don't know the threshold off the top of my head for MOS degradation. Generally, MOS is on a 5-point scale, and so off the top of my head, I would think that anything that's like a 1 or greater on the NMOS or the network mean opinion score is going to be poor, but I'll follow up with you on that. VPN usage. VPN is just like another dead ringer in a Teams environment and really in any real-time communications environment that we would need to look more closely at being a potential trouble spot. The reason is that we do native encryption for both our signaling and our media traffic. Signaling we secure with HTTPS, media we secure with a 128-bit AES pre-shared key. That's just what SRTP does. And so wrapping the traffic up in a VPN tunnel does nothing more than have the traffic take the scenic route to get where it needs to go, which is not good. So it's an additional latency, and it's double encryption. And then you also have a potential point of a bottleneck at the VPN concentrator. So this report allows you to, again, slice and dice conference, peer-to-peer, client, etc. And you just see where in your global enterprise, like where's the majority of the VPN usage happening, and where does that equate to a poor quality experience? Because it doesn't always, but it's an indicator. Okay, Dwayne, back to you.
Thank you, sir. So TCP. I know these are not the TPS reports from Office Space. So TCP, what's the problem with TCP? Why do we want to use UDP versus TCP, right? Again, if we're talking about signing in, because historically Microsoft said, bypass everything for Office 365. I know you all probably remember Microsoft making that statement. We backpedaled on that a little bit. Why did we backpedal? Well, we backpedaled on it because if it takes a couple of extra seconds for Sarah to sign in to Office 365, she's never going to notice the difference. But if Sarah, Matt, Jonathan, Dwayne are all on a call and there's a delay, right, which is what TCP would call because we're talking about connection oriented, right? What will happen then? She's going to notice that. So when we did that backpedal, we talked about optimizing, and there's 3 categories of that, and that URL is provided in this presentation as well. And you'll be able to walk through and look at those. Most of you probably are already aware of them, but still a good idea. Again, these graphics, right? When we start talking about inside and outside, conferencing versus peer-to-peer, and what client, right? In some cases, I've had customers who have had problems with clients, right? Specific clients. You'll notice too, these IPs and ports greatly reduced in number, right? Used to be a huge list, still in some cases are. But Teams itself, 4 ports, 34, 78, 79, 80, and 81. Right? You've got 3 major subnets there. So that is a big change in what Teams and from Skype for Business Online, right, and Skype for Business. And again, visuals are completely interactive, right? You can drill down and you can begin to look at those. So let's talk a little bit about this media health. This is one of my favorite pages because these all look like speedometers in the Mustang. And the slicers that are available over here. And remember, we talked earlier about, and we were trying to emphasize the building files and the building file names and the cities on there. That's where this begins to come in handy, right? And unless you are the network guy and you have all of those subnets memorized, probably going to want to upload a building file and have those names to IP relationship drawn in there. But again, inside and outside, right? This is all available for you to go through, to utilize. We talk about, color coding those visuals. Some of us, we're very visual, so we like the color codes. the target goals that are listed in here. And again, the slicers we talked about for filtering. Filters are color coded. Purple are for the building file. Tan are pulled from CQD. Right. So client slicer, syncing with other reports where applicable. Right. So we can do a drill down on those, and we'll be able to go back in and we'll be able to see what's happening there. Again, audio health, this is at a high level. There is an audio health tab and an audio health details tab. One of the things I love about this is you get the city, you get the good streams, the poor streams, and then what the poor audio rate was. Right, so if this were Jacksonville, Florida, which is where I'm located, I wouldn't be too worried about it. But if we're down here and we're looking in Texas, you know, there's only 1,000 streams listed good, 444 are poor. This is the number I'm going to start to look at. So I'm going to drill down specifically into that city, and I'm going to begin to look through and find out what's going on, right? This Wi-Fi up here is a good indicator. Right, and some of these things, due to the nature of the world today with people working from home, some of these things are going to be out of our control, right? I'm quite sure that there is not an organization in the world that is going to issue 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi routers to all of its employees who work from home. That's probably not going to happen. So odds are some of your remote workers at home are going to have a 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi. Right, so you would be able to report out and say, you know, look, I mean, the difference is pretty drastic between the two. So you would actually be able to report out and report up and see that, right?
And I will say that in my experience, that is very typical, that you see a big difference in poor audio rate between 5 gigahertz band of Wi-Fi versus 2.4 gigahertz. Have you seen the same, Dwayne?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. So, and we talk a little bit about these being interactive and what the color scales are, right? And this is just a graphic around what it is and how we, how we configure it. So I don't have to spend a great deal of time digging through. As I said, if this first one up here is Jacksonville and it's green, I've already moved on, right? The ones I'm looking for are the red ones, some of the, I don't know what color that one is. Would you say that's orange-ish?
Yeah, we'll go with orange. We'll go with orange.
Okay. And then some of the yellows, right? That's where I'm going to go. And that was completely intentional. So you can drill through all of these dimensions. Right. Let's talk a little bit about ASN. This report will access a public IP database. So if you have a ASN that is registered with that database, we will be able to see who owns that ASN. So in my case, if you looked me up, what you would see would be AT&T, because that is who owns the ASN. That is my ISP. Okay. They have that ASN number registered, right? So you would actually see that in that reporting.
Cool. Thank you, Dwayne.
Yes, sir.
We'll shift gears a little bit in terms of the sort of data that we're staring at here, and I'm gonna breeze through these. But most of our focus today is around quality. And then when we say quality, usually when I think of quality, I think of a call where we're able to set up the call, and then we either have a great quality experience with clean, crisp audio where we can hear people cleanly, and we have great video, high resolution video. But the other part of having a quality experience is actually being able to ensure that every time someone goes to make a call or start a video chat, that it works as designed. And so that's what we're talking about with media setup here. Usually media setup issues are dead ringers for firewall configuration issues and or proxy issues. What this allows you to do is in a large managed network where you have lots of, enterprise networks are very much living, breathing organisms. So as you have changes, you can be made aware of where we're seeing, decryption of traffic, like you'll see in this setup failures here. Sometimes when you see things like compound TCP, it indicates that you've got something sitting in the middle, decrypting the traffic. And you just see trending over time. And then as Dwayne mentioned earlier, we can look at the ASN or public network and see, where to which sites or which spots on your network are we seeing setup failures. Reliability is in the same vein. The difference between setup and reliability is setup is the setup, like the initiation of the session itself. If firewall is blocking the media from getting to point A to point B, that's a setup failure. If the media is set up and the call is set up and I'm talking to Sarah and then the call drops, that would be classified as a dropped stream. It's typical same culprits. Usually it's things like proxy and or firewall that will recognize the traffic and then in a misconfigured scenario start rejecting the traffic or dropping the traffic. Audio health details, as Dwayne mentioned, for a lot of these reports, there are kind of two parts where there's like a summary report and then a details report. This particular audio health details report is focused only on meetings. There's some interesting information here where we see some of that same data points that we saw earlier, Wi-Fi band and a BSSID, or like essentially the unique identifier for a particular access point. What's cool about that is you can see like, okay, like there's in a particular building, these particular access points are congested. That's really cool. In addition to seeing, high level trending, which are you seeing poor streams in one direction or another? This actually is an interesting one that I've run into in the last year because, some customers are not managing, they're not properly prioritizing Teams media traffic. Sometimes what we would see is in a small, like a branch site, you would see poor calls in one direction more than another. And in this case, this second to first in our service, first is always in a meeting scenario is always our cloud, and second is the other user. So in this case, this is traffic from customer to the cloud, and so that is sometimes an indicator that there is a queue there's a bottleneck at the router. So there's not a priority for the Teams traffic, and there's a bottleneck at the router. So those voice packets that are really time sensitive are waiting in line, and that's causing a poor experience. In the interest of time here, I'm going to keep flowing through here. And yes, more on the audio health details, including that you can look at things like the user principal name. And again, all that's obscured from us as Microsoft employees, but you can see, you can get down to that layer of granularity. We can see for a particular user, what is the health of their audio over a longer period of time than what you'd see in call analytics. All right, Dwayne, back to you.
Okay, so this is one of the most important pages on this report. It's a search, right? What are we searching for? We can search directly for a UPN. We can search for a specific subnet, a conference ID, a meeting ID, regardless. Where do you get a conference ID from? You get that out of the Teams Admin Center, out of the TAC in Call Analytics. Where are you going to get the conference meeting ID? You're going to get that in the same place. Okay. You can enter any of those search fields, and the bonus here is that once you pull a UPN, right, or a meeting ID, you can actually right-click and drill through, and that will take you farther into the report to see the specific audio health details for that meeting or for that user, right? That's where you're going to see what Matt was just showing you, that trending, right? And that's where that's important. Advanced, thank you. So conference ID, right? This is, we specifically searched a conference ID. You'll see specific, how many authenticated users, right? And you would see UPNs here. We see asterisks because, again, that's considered PII, so we break that out. Important thing here is, you'll see right here, there's a CDR response, right? Where we talk about there's a media connectivity error and what that error is. And then we break that out over here. So this is one of those, right, where you would go up here into the top and grab the focus mode and expand that out so you can see the entire thing. Extremely, extremely useful. This is just kind of a couple of the ones, the reports that live in here. And I think, Matt, this was you up.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So the next three reports that I have to wrap up the discussion of the kind of report by report deep dive is all around looking at the networks, looking at networks themselves and matching them up against each other, frankly. So this first one allows you to, it looks at the worst performing networks by subnet. And so you can start to make some targeted investigation on where you can further optimize your environment. So you can look at poor audio by subnet, poor video by subnet, poor sharing by subnet, media drop by subnet, and then also by the public subnet as well. So we see we use this kind of the standard NAT traversal, firewall traversal suite called ICE, Interactive Connectivity Establishment, that suite of protocols for traversing, doing all sorts of fancy stuff to traverse firewalls in NAT. And so we know about what is the public IP address that is that if you're behind a NAT, what's the public IP address that you're behind? We have visibility into that, and so we can represent that, in these poor audio by public subnet, poor video by public subnet, etc. Top 10 managed subnets. And again, when we talk about the managed, managed equals inside. We talk about inside in the building file. That's, you define whether subnets are inside or managed. And those are all the ones that are under your control, whereas the ones that are outside are the equate to unmanaged network locations. So I'm sitting at home in a work from home scenario, I would be on an unmanaged subnet. Now you always have the flexibility because you're defining that. If you maybe let's say you have some VIPs and you want to you want to represent them in your building file so that you can look very closely at their quality carved up against others, you can certainly do that. You have that flexibility to do that. And then finally, you look at the autonomous system number. So the nice thing about that data is you can look, if you're a large enterprise, that has multiple carriers, you can look at the relative quality of your different network providers and different locations as your you can just stack up the data next to each other to figure out where the team's experience is better than if it is better in certain geographies than other, or better with certain network providers than others. With that concludes kind of our presentation.